Good afternoon, everyone. CJ. My name is Steve Orr. I'm the managing partner at Orr Group, and we have our illustrious management team here today. And I thought I'd just give 2 seconds of background and then go through a couple of issues and then introduce this group for you today. First, I'll just start by thanking everyone to come. We've got a really great group today, a lot of folks, and hopefully we'll have enough interesting things to say that will make it worth your time. But really, thank you for joining. We appreciate all those who over the course of the last 5-6 months have participated regularly with these webinars, so thank you. I am very proud of what we have assembled, both in the people present today and in the company that we run. Orr Group has been around for about 30 years now. Just in case you didn't know, I like to always say that I started this with my wife, Carol, almost 30 years ago. Carol remains involved, a little less so than what she was in the beginning, but it is a 50-50 owned business. We have discovered an awful lot of things along the way. What we decided to do today is have a cocktail event. So I actually have wine in an Orr Group mug, needless to say. And I will be reviewing what everyone else is drinking today a little bit later. But we thought it was important to go back and think about all that's happened since March. We have had several webinars. We've picked different topics along the way that we think have represented the concerns of the moment. There have been a lot of them. There have been a lot of changes. I think it's fair to say we're still in uncharted territory because everything keeps changing so rapidly. And I don't think you can expect that to change much. The rate of change is likely to continue at the pace it has been because there's so many unanswered questions. The economy, social unrest, the racial injustice issues that are serious and on us and related and not related to COVID. And I think this all impacts the nonprofit field in a way that is unprecedented and challenging. So I think it's caused all of us to go overboard in the way we're challenging our ways of thinking, challenging our ways of doing things. The traditions may have gone away forever. I don't know. But clearly those of us who are trying to be creative and entrepreneurial are going to win and have been. And those who, sort of get fearful and put your head in a hole are probably not going to win. So we have been advocating the former, not the latter. So we started a lot of conversations, as I said. A lot of you have been listening in, and thank you for that. So we've learned a lot. And what we want to try to do today is reflect on that. And we've got some really great people to do it. So Craig asked me to reflect on something that's happened the last 6 months that I wasn't really expecting. And when I really put it all together, it's, I think, what everyone's referring to now is this K-shaped recovery. I just never would have thought that this would have been an outcome of a situation like this where, actually the majority, it seems, of the economy has recovered or is recovering. A lot of us still have jobs, but yet there's an unfortunate piece, in the downside of the K, where really there are a lot of people being left behind. And it's been clearly an accelerant to the racial inequity issues that are not new, but we continue to struggle with as a society, and it's just made it a lot worse, and it's really unfair. So I would not have expected that, Craig, and I really think it's one of the very unfortunate things that are happening, in addition to so many other, difficult things that are going on right now. So that's my, sort of big observation of what has happened here. It's, since March. So through the course of the discussion today, let's look for observations like that. We participate you, as usual, for involving yourselves through the chat line and through the Q&A function. Should you have a question or want to make a comment, we try to go through all of those and involve you in it. So please be aggressive on that. So I want to introduce all of my fellow comrades here. This is our management team. We've all been together for quite a while. So let me just start. I'll go starting with Craig Shelley. Craig has been with us for, I don't know, Craig, how many years? I lose track. 8, 9, 10?
No, it feels like 8 or 9. No, 7 years. 7 years and a couple weeks to the day.
So Craig is just a terrific relationship manager, builder. He knows the business extremely well, very experienced. You can look at his background on our website, but Craig has taken recently on the mandate of really taking over all of the marketing for the company. CJ was doing that previous to that, but CJ's taken it over. I'm sorry, Craig is taking it over more recently. And there's a lot of pieces to that, from webinar to articles to looking at all of our platforms and all of our services. And we have really expanded our services a great deal. So Craig, thank you for that. We appreciate it. And I want to ask each person what you are drinking tonight by way of introduction. So Craig, what say you?
I am representing Long Island with an Oyster Bay Brewing Company, American lager. So brewed right down the street, just 2 miles from where I sit. It's quite tasty.
Very good and local. Okay, let's go to Shabby Tabiti. She's changed her name. No, not really. Rosales Tabiti, whatever you'd like to call it. Shabby runs all of our HR, but is truly a phenomenally creative, smart, entrepreneurial person. She not only runs our HR, but she has recently launched recruiting business for us and an outsourced HR business. And she comes in with unique skills. Shabby's young, but she acts very old in her experience and her wisdom. So Shabby, what say you tonight? What are you drinking, if anything?
Okay, so I have so many things to say. In pure Shabby fashion, I forgot that we were supposed to have a drink with us tonight. So I
failed first test.
I know. But what I will say is I made the mistake. So Steve and I text each other all the time. And I made the mistake of sharing my Bitmoji with him, which has my maiden name on it. And now he will not let it go. So Shabby to be Rosales is just how we do this. It's fine. It's fine. I love it.
All right. So the bottom line, you're not drinking anything. So you may excuse yourself and get something if you wish.
I may.
CJ, let's go to you. CJ is my son. I'm very proud that he's on board. He's been with the company now for, is it 7 years, CJ? Very good. So CJ started out, learning the business in the earlier stages of his career at Orr Group, but then expanded into, building his consultant skills, started building relationships. For about 1.5 years, 2 years, up until the end of last year, he took over as COO of the company. That was quite an eye-opening experience for him and for us. A lot of issues there. We're a growing company, so lots of things to manage there. And then most recently this year, he has built relationships and built partner relationships with some really very significant organizations, and we're really proud of what he's done. And CJ, what are you drinking tonight?
I guess I'm being lame. I'm drinking a LaCroix, mainly because I know when I go downstairs, I'll have 2 really annoying kids that I will need to be on top of. All my wits need to be about me. So starting with LaCroix, drinks happen at 7 o'clock when the kids go down.
Pro tip, the kids are a lot less annoying if you start drinking that. Just
That's also probably fair.
2 beautiful grandchildren. Come on. Okay, last but not least, Kelly Dumpy. Kelly, you've been with the firm, 14, 15 years, a good long time. You and I have worked together. What is it?
13 years.
All right, I always like to expand that a little bit. But Kelly has done so many things in the firm. She manages some of our biggest relationships. She also, as of the last couple of years, and aggressively since COVID really, has developed all of our strategy services. So from strategic planning to development planning, campaign planning, you name it, anything in the category of strategy. Plan giving is a big one. So Kelly, what say you on the alcoholic front?
Nothing on the alcohol front. I'm in CJ's club and I'm also drinking a seltzer right now. So,
well,
Steve, you'll have a lot more fun than us.
I brought my favorite wine, inexpensive. I recommend it, Miomi. It's on in every restaurant menu. It's pretty good. I actually haven't had any yet, so I can still think and talk. Okay, so that's our crew. We're obviously having fun. It's a cocktail party. I hope it's not too informal for any of you. All right, so we decided to put out a survey, and we want to start there to sort of ground the conversation in things that we've heard from you and from the community of nonprofits. But I want to say this to start. Data. Data is a fascinating thing, and as a company, we really want to be focused and have been focused on being data-driven. So a couple of things. Since COVID, we've had COVID time, i.e. a little extra time among all of us at the company. And so what I did was divide the company into 9 different committees, and many of those are looking into and creating ability to be more data driven. And it's really worked well. And we're in the phase of applying that more to our clients and partners. So the second observation is that, I think everyone would agree on the call that the data that we need to raise funds is more critical than ever. The metrics we use to measure our programmatic outcomes, is important to all donors, particularly foundations and large contributors. And it's just an area of the business that we feel is vitally important and requires a lot of attention. And the industry as a whole doesn't have all the skills necessary to do that. So we want to be helpful in that category and have spent a lot of time as a result of that. So Kelly, why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, just summarize and highlight the big issues that came out of this survey from, we had over 100 nonprofits respond, so it's really meaningful in example size.
Yes, thank you, Steve. So we did this in July, so a few months into the pandemic and the impact of it. We wanted to focus our questions around 3 key areas. One around strategy and how organizations were looking out over the next several months and how they're making decisions. Second, on fundraising, of course, and then within fundraising, a closer look at campaigns specifically. So a few key findings I wanted to highlight, and I think we have some visuals to look at too. So nearly 57% of those who responded stated that their programming has changed significantly in response to COVID, with another 40% saying it's changed somewhat. And so that's nearly 100% of those who responded saying they've adjusted their programming in response to the pandemic. And that's probably unsurprising. And with such a widespread impact on programming, I think it's also not surprising that over half of our respondents who have a strategic plan in place right now are revisiting those plans. And then about 25% of respondents who have said that they're launching a brand new planning process altogether, that they're taking a moment to do that. And so at the same time, we had about 75% of respondents who are planning to revisit their cases for support. So between the changes they're seeing with their programming, perhaps some new decisions about their overall direction coming out of their strategic planning processes, they're seeing the need to revise their cases for support to accommodate some messaging related to the pandemic and any changes that's having on their plans. With respect to fundraising, as of July, when they responded here, about 43% of respondents were projecting a decrease of some amount in 2021. So whether it was decreased somewhat or decreased significantly, that's about 43% of respondents. Although 57% were expecting it to either stay the same or increase to some degree. And in terms of donor types and fundraising streams, individual giving revenue is expected to grow the most by the organizations who responded, and events, again, unsurprisingly, are expected to decrease the most, continuing into 2021. In terms of investing in fundraising staff, those who are doing the actual raising of the dollars, the majority of respondents, about 61%, are expecting to keep their teams constant. They're not making any more cuts, but they're not adding either. And 22% are going to make some investments and increase the size of their team, and about 17% expecting to decrease their team size. And then lastly, when we asked about campaigns as a way to measure organizations' confidence in their major gift efforts during the pandemic, the organizations who responded that were in active campaign mode at the time the pandemic hit in the spring, about 25% cited they're not planning on making any changes to their campaign plans. And others cited some changes such as extending the overall campaign timeline, maybe pausing for a short time frame, adjusting their case. A couple people mentioned they're decreasing their goal, and a couple even mentioned they're actually increasing their goal, perhaps because they identified additional needs tied to the pandemic. But interestingly, no one selected the response we gave them as an option that they were going to end their campaign early. They just hit too much of a roadblock due to the pandemic. Although we did receive a handful of responses for those who were not in active campaigns, but were starting to plan campaigns. They chose to put the campaign on pause indefinitely until they had a better sense of how things were shaping up. But overwhelmingly, respondents were pressing forward with their campaigns in some way.
So Craig, I want to ask you some specifics about that, but I have to go through some of these comments. You guys are all in the spirit through the questions I've got. We've got one person drinking Devil's Backbone Oak Fest Amber beer. That's my brother-in-law, by the way. Manhattan's another. Here's one of, let's see, on the second can of peach pear LaCroix. Good. Tea, but with a little bourbon biscuit. That's creative. And then my good friend asked me, will slides be available? Howard, they'll be available. Absolutely. We'll ship them right out. And thank you, Kelly, for going through that. So Craig, you designed this survey actually, so maybe you have some general observations, but I do think if we zero in on the campaign piece, you know, what are your reactions to that, and does that correspond with what you're actually seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, short answer, it definitely does, right? To me, one of the things that really jumped out though was the 50% plus that were sort of in campaign or about to go in campaign. I think we felt like the way the economy was, the way giving had been going, like it seemed like everybody was in a campaign. Now we actually have some data to point out that, yeah, in fact, like half the people out there were in a campaign. That's why it felt that way. So that's great. I mean, I think the thing that resonated around, like, everybody's doing something different, but nobody's really walking away. And I think, like, you have to sort of place yourself in the time, right? So you have to sort of think about how are you relevant in the time that you're living in. And I think that's why you're seeing people adjust their cases and things like that, or we saw a lot of things about people are going to adjust their strategic planning. So I think that's important. Behind that, I'd say, like, you can't be something you're not, but think about why you're important in this time and sort of redefine yourself. But most importantly, and I was psyched to see that most people were sort of mirroring this, is yes, change course. Maybe it's going to take longer. Maybe you explain it differently, but by all means, move forward, right? Like, if you were important on March 1st, you're important on September 1st, right? Like, if your mission isn't important now, you probably need to be thinking about maybe it was never important to begin with, right? But assuming what you're doing is important, your ambition should never shrink, right? Maybe it's going to take you longer to get there. Maybe we don't want to go public today and we'll wait a little bit. Like, there's lots of what ifs and things you can adjust and change. But I think for me, campaigns are sort of like a stalking horse for your ambitions, right? Your ambitions should stay as big as they always have, and we should figure out how to go after them. So I was excited to see that by and large, that's what people were doing.
Yeah, I think, Craig, as you know, one of the themes that we developed early on, you know, through these messaging techniques of webinars and such, is the communication, the need to just constantly talk with each other and listen. A lot of listening, actually more listening than talking. And I think that has been very effective for those of us who've done it. And I'm talking about, you know, donor communities, you know, making sure that we're in touch with those who care about our institutions and our, you know, our missions. And I think that goes to the point of the campaigns. So when things do start coming back or have come back, you know, the economy getting stronger, the stock market, which has everything to do with, you know, everyone's ability to make larger donations. I do think that whole communication piece has been very effective in keeping the lines of communication strong, and the activity that we've seen in the last 60 days around campaigns has been terrific. It's been enormous. You know, in all the ways, Kelly, you described through the statistics. So very interesting period in that way. Now, Shabby, let's go to you. So on the, you know, personnel front, the hiring front, the changes that have, you know, that you've seen through this period, how do you sum it up? And do you see the demand for fundraisers in particular, you know, high, or is there just a bunch of change going on? How do you synthesize all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it definitely feels like things are thawing out as compared to the really intense hiring freeze that we saw implemented at the start of this back in March. Organizations are starting to realize the immense talent that is out there, some fortuitous from being let go from other organizations, and some because they are realizing that now is the time to think about making a move. The push for top talent has never been more important than it is right at this moment. I mean, this is the time to make investments in people, and we're seeing it across the board, definitely with development staff, specifically frontline fundraisers, but also in terms of infrastructure building, back office support roles, data heavy skill sets, people with managerial prowess as well. We're seeing it across all channels.
Okay, CJ, let's go to you. You have been embedded with a couple of very sophisticated organizations who are dealing with, the themes of the day. What do you come away from that experience with, and what observations do you have? And one of the questions that actually goes to that, are these focus shifts that we're experiencing through COVID and then, the economy and through the racial tension, is that a short-term thing, or is that, here to stay, and are we changing, our case statements as a result?
That's a really interesting question, the latter part of that. When we first starting to answer the first part, I'm involved with a few different clients that are in the Venn diagram, or in the pie chart. You have the 10% that was significantly increasing on their revenue. And I'm working with a few organizations that are in that bucket. In order to be in that bucket, we found that there's two kind of things that are happening at the same time with these organizations. One, their revenue streams are mostly ultra high net worth, foundation, corporate, individual, and less on event heavy ticket sales, anything where you have to be in person. So they're first with a revenue model teamed up with a great fundraising team is suited or well suited for success. And then the other part of what they're doing well is that their missions are exactly aligning with what is happening right now. So with the health crisis, you obviously have a lot of the health organizations that are providing solutions for that. And they're seeing a lot of the fundraising coming in right now. Then on the racial inequity issues that are happening, organizations that are leaning into that are seeing a surge in flow of dollars. So the organizations that kind of have a great fundraising team, and also their missions, dial right into what's happening right now, are seeing significant increases. Is this a short-term thing or a long-term thing? Racial inequity issues have been around for hundreds of years. So it depends on, how long your time horizon is. I think immediately it's not going anywhere until November, right? That's going to be a large event risk one way or the other. Long term, I do think that this has brought everything to the forefront more visually than has ever happened before with videos and social media, that more people are paying attention to it. So I think that it is here to stay. And the health issue, I actually do think will be alleviated hopefully soon when we do get a vaccine and things normalize on that end. But I do think the racial inequity piece is going to last for a little bit longer.
So you've been working very closely with organizations that received, sort of from heaven, these very large gifts from Mackenzie Scott, the Bezos grant of $1.7 billion. And that just happened in a way that was so phenomenal for organizations that largely didn't expect it at all, didn't ask for it, but really game changer. What on the ground? How does that impact the organization, CJ? What have you seen?
It's life-changing. And so I'll just put a little asterisk on this. They have been doing, those organizations that received a gift from Mackenzie Scott have been doing things right for probably years and years. And someone finally went through the due diligence process and recognized that and funded those organizations that have been. It is an absolute game changer. It's unrestricted revenue, and the Mackenzie entrusted the organizations to use it as they see fit. So it's not only actually Mackenzie in this moment. I mean, look at all those foundations that have issued bonds. and that are giving away large donations right now. So like Ford, MacArthur, Duke, all these foundations, they had never done that before. You look at Jack Dorsey, that's something that's never happened before. If you fit within what his priorities are, there's a good chance you can get a gift out of that. If you look at some of these other billionaires and large donations that are happening, I don't think we've seen such a big inflow of large gifts like this before, and there's a lot of organizations that are taking advantage of it.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in some of the other panelists' experience with, this more recent phenomena of very, very large gifts around very specific issues with real impact expectations and such. Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we've been seeing this trend for a little bit, right? Where like people are giving larger gifts to few organizations. I always equated to, like when I started, you give a little bit of money to everybody. Now you're sort of, no matter how much money you have, you're starting to say, no, like these are my 2 or 3 favorite things. And that's where you give. And then as wealth has increased, right, you've seen these people just sort of making money at such a pace, and the giving pledge and all these things that have happened. You've seen these really enormous gifts. I think there's sort of some commonality though in the organizations that get them or receive these gifts, whether it's, Mackenzie Scott, Jack Dorsey, or even, Gates Foundation, or name it, right? We've been seeing these things for a while. They tend to have a really big idea, right? Sort of small idea, small money, big idea, big money. They have a really dynamic sales force, like in terms of they have somebody that can go out there and sort of tell their story in a very compelling way. But then sort of the dirty secret that we probably don't want to admit when we say, well, geez, everybody can do this, is they have access to the people that can give that money, right? So whereas Mackenzie Scott was new to philanthropy, she partnered with some people, like there was a way that you were able to sort of access and get on that list. Jack Dorsey's doing a little bit of a different way, granted, though, if you have somebody that knows him, that talks to him, that's probably a lot better than somebody that doesn't. But if you look at historically these organizations where you've seen sort of 8-figure gifts being made, it's, there's some connection there, right? So I think of one early in my career worked on a $50 million gift. That person and his family had been giving on some level to this organization for 30 years, right? Like, yes, there was a deliberate effort, and the largest prior gift was $1 million, and you went to $50 million. But they had we were able to engage in that conversation in the first place. And you look at, another organization that received, this Mackenzie Scott money, that's like their 5th gift of that size, right? So like they are equipped to sort of take money like this. So it's a little unfair because probably the rich will get richer in terms of organizations. But I don't know, there is sort of things that you have to do and you have to have to sort of open the door to this kind of money. But you can do it, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
So Shabby, I want to circle back to you on general DEI question, but Kelly, let's finish the issue about case statement and shifting to COVID and racial injustice and economic issues. Is that something we're doing a lot of work on that front, so I'm picking on you. But what is your perspective on the longevity of changing, adapting to the current environment? Is that the long-term environment? That's the question I'm asking. And are we all to change our mission statements now, to be appealing to that?
Well, I think, that's the hard question. I don't know that I have a perspective on that. I think that might vary for each organization. And, that's where I think taking the time to step sideways right now is really important, and to wrestle with a question like that. And that's where, some kind of planning process can come in, whether it's something formal or something like you pull together your board for a half-day or full-day retreat where you wrestle with these issues. So, we've been managing through this period where so many organizations have had to make serious choices about how to just survive in a lot of cases. Yet times like this can really drive great innovation. So in this kind of environment, it can be hard to step sideways, but I think it's so critical right now to wrestle with those larger issues. Are we thinking this is the new normal? Or what elements of it are the new normal, and we're in it for the long haul? And how do we adapt to that from our, program portfolio? As the population we're serving, are their needs changing for the long term in some way? And we need to pivot in response to that. Have we found that our business model is over reliant on one area that's been hit really hard by the pandemic, and do we need to completely restructure how we've modeled our organization as a business? Leadership succession, you might be experiencing that right now. There's all these different situations that I think the pandemic has shined a light on, that maybe were issues for actually a long time within your organization, and you were able to sort of not deal with them. But we're in a moment now where I think you don't have the luxury of not dealing with it anymore. So this is my plug for, really taking the time to step sideways and wrestle with those hard decisions.
Yeah, and strategic planning, I think most of us have traditionally thought about that as, oh, we need to take a look at our programming directions and the metrics around that and the fundraising techniques that we use and the structure of the organization, et cetera. But now so much of that is focused on culture and the focus on DEI. So Shabby, I go to you. We as a company are spending so much time in this area, importantly and appropriately. The community also is. What are your feelings about what is being done, what needs to be done? How is it changing each of our cultures, and how should it be changing?
Yeah, no, I mean, culture building is something that's so sort of core to what we do in our work, but the DEI aspect of it has been really fascinating as of late, because this is not something where this is not our area of expertise. Even someone like myself that has been formally trained in this space, I am also not an expert in this. And so it's actually been really interesting and rewarding and sort of transformative to be able to work through this ourselves at our own organization. We have, you all know, but I'm saying this for the audience, we've partnered with an outside consultant or an expert in this field to help us navigate it for ourselves, right? And so I think this is one of those situations where we have found, in some small way, we found things that work for us on our journey. And I think the thing that has made it a success in a small way, I mean, we have a long way to go, but I think the thing that's made it a success for us is finding something that allows us to be true to ourselves. And the advice that I would give for anyone in navigating this, there's a lot of pressure in wanting to do it right. But I think for any advice that I would give to anyone is to find something where you can be true to yourself and also to your own organizations, and also find experts and find people that can teach you and guide you and walk you through how to address it in the most appropriate way.
So Shabby, you and I talk about this all the time, and you're guiding me every day. I'm working on this. I'm trying to improve myself as a leader and as on reflection, hopefully a reflection of our company. What are mistakes do you think that are made, in the workplace that are not using appropriate or sensitive techniques that involve or goes to true engagement and involvement, in the way that we need to operate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things, and we've said this actually in a couple of our webinars. So if you've been following along, you probably would have heard this already. But I think it's one of those things where leading with grace and leading with respect and with reverence for your team, I think is the most important thing to be successful anywhere, and to enact change and impact an organization at a cultural level. Takes a real understanding of getting buy-in, setting expectations, communicating early and often, aligning with core values. I think all of these things go a long way, whether you're talking about specifically being in the DEI space, or if you're talking about just cultural change in general. I think mistakes that people make is jumping in with both feet without having the tools, the resources, the support, and whatever it is that they need, and the clarity up at the top, and the vision to say, this is the direction that we're headed. We feel strongly about this. This is our commitment, et cetera. And specifically on the DEI front, for us, we've been really mindful it's a very fine line of wanting to be celebratory and practicing optical allyship, which is the thing that we do not want to do. And so we've been really mindful to not put out blanket statements for the sake of putting out statements. We have not, acted in a performative nature for the sake of acting performative. I mean, we are really trying to enact change at our organization. It is hard work. It is life work. It is something that we're all committed to. But we're not doing it alone. We're doing it with experts. And I mean, as much as I can keep touting that, you know, call on experts, look to people that can actually guide you through this, because it's not easy, it's not simple, and it's not designed to be. These are structures that we are having to undo that have been in place for centuries. So it's a lot of work. And I would say lean on experts and do the things that we've been saying all this time. Be clear, be transparent, communicate early and often, lead with a vision, all of the above.
Yeah, I would just say from my own experience, you know, I got into this business of nonprofit to try to make a difference and try to, you know, be more engaged in the issues you're talking about. And to some degree, you know, that's happened. But I think with what's going on, you know, in the last 6 months for our own company, in our own environment, we've realized, and you've helped us realize, that it really starts here. You know, it starts inwardly. It starts with our own actions and our own approach to hiring and to the way we convey, you know, our thoughts to others and deal with others and so forth. So really smart and something we all need to take seriously, and I hope we are. So, okay, so let's go through a series of sort of questions. CJ, I'll pick on you first. What are things that you're finding are really good advice, you know, to clients right now, given all the things, you know, we're working on, whether it's raising money or, you know, should I do this event or not? And should I go into strategic planning? You know, what do you find yourself advising right now?
It's funny. We talked about this on an original webinar back in March and May, and we said then that communication was key. And it's funny, the world hasn't stopped changing since that original webinar. So I still think that communication is top of your priority list of things to be doing right now. You really want to be in front of all your donors during this time, and you want them, you know, thinking back at this moment as something that they would remember, and remember that you were part of this with them. You're part of the shared experience. So communication, we're still very much on that. In terms of fundraising, I do think that there are two kind of parallel lanes that people are running down right now. One is chasing after these really unique opportunities for large gifts, things that you haven't asked for before, and going bigger if you have the opportunity to do that. In the other lane, it's making sure that you're continuing to do the fundraising that you always have done. Right, you need to be continuing to do your bread and butter, and you know, getting your board engaged, getting the gifts from them, from the companies that you're working with, from the foundations, etc. And you know, for the events, it's figuring out how to do that in a virtual world, and fundraising in a virtual event. So those are kind of two lanes that I'm seeing a lot of the organizations I work with kind of going down right now.
Okay, Kelly, same question to you.
I don't know if it's the best advice, but it's what I think I'm giving most often. And it's kind of what I was saying earlier, that, you know, right now is a moment to face into challenges that organizations may have been facing long before the pandemic. And that we can't really afford to not wrestle with those anymore. And so it's about really making choices, you know, looking at all your fundraising and deciding, okay, what is the most effective, efficient way to raise this dollar, right? And not just continuing to do something because you've always done it, or realizing now you really do have to diversify, or realizing, how do I build an endowment or a reserve fund so we don't feel like we're in this position, God forbid, you know, if something like this were to happen again. And then again, you know, making sure your programming is still fresh and effective. And, you know, just again, I would just say, facing into those hard issues, I think, you know, you have the attention of your teams and your board. They really are focused on this now. So, you know, take the opportunity to do it.
Craig, last.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you touched on this earlier, how this has accelerated every trend, right? So online shopping, you know, it was going to take over the world. It just did it that much quicker. You know, people are going to stop watching baseball. That happened much more quickly. I love the Mets, but you know, you can't watch it anymore, right? So all those trends are happening. And I think it's the same thing with fundraising. For years, we've said individual donors is the way to focus. Well, now I think the world has made that point, hard and fast, that, sort of the quick money of events, corporations, all these other things, like individuals is your bread and butter. And then that takes me to like where I really think there's an opportunity to focus is I think your sort of brand and how you tell your story as a nonprofit is going to get like super important. And I was always kind of a guy that poo-pooed that, like whatever, put me in a room with a donor and don't worry about the brand, like I'll get them to give money. I now think like you can't sort of narrow cast your message. So like, these are my major donors. They're following you on Twitter and they're looking at your Facebook and they're on your Instagram. Like if your brand isn't speaking in one voice, donors now know that, right? So you can't kind of just sort of fake it. So I think as we focus more on individual donors, which is I think where we're going, how we tell our story by the way of our brand is going to be so much more important than it's ever been before. That's sort of my big idea at the moment.
Probably what you do during this moment will define you going forward, and is an opportunity to create or continue with whatever brand you have.
And you touched on something that's really important, and everybody's asking the same questions. Okay, I've been doing all these events, which are transactional and, kind of easier to complete a $10,000 table than it would be to apply for a $10,000 gift from a foundation or a corporation if it weren't an event, something where they're going to get direct recognition. Major gifts is really where the action is, and that is where it needs to be and probably should have been. So good advice has always been, and that's really goes back to CJ, your point of communication, and something you're right, we've been saying since day one. Communication is a lot about listening, right? And it's a lot about understanding. It's a lot about feeling, what the other person's feeling, because right now people are feeling still, even 6 months into this, more confusion and there are more questions and more issues, that really people want to talk about, donors want to talk about more than ever. And they are concerned about the missions they have been supporting, but listening carefully and, you learn a lot by listening and plugging them into the right part of your mission that will really excite them is very good advice. And so I keep trying to advise that. So Shabby, I haven't forgotten about you. Let's come to you and get your worldly advice.
I don't have, yeah, exactly. I don't have advice on the fundraising front, but my advice to leaders and managers out there is to be bold. Right at this moment is the time to be bold with decisions, to make the tough decisions if needed, to be creative where you need to, and to like dare to do things that you weren't dreaming of doing just 6 months ago. This is the moment to be bold. Things are starting to thaw. People are starting to either get back to normal or creating a new normal for themselves, which they've probably done already. And now is the time. We can't just wait for what's to come. Now is the time to be bold.
That's a great lesson, because if you've been a person who has not embraced change, you always hear that, oh, change is a great thing and you got to embrace it and all that. Well, most people don't, because they're in their comfort zone and they would prefer to stay in that comfort zone. Well, I think to Shabby's point, if you sort of dare to be great and take a chance, it might fail, but then again, it might absolutely win. And people are looking for creativity and new ideas. And we just have to be constantly testing ourselves about what is the new way of doing things. And it's going to, I think the rate of change, as we said in the beginning, is going to continue at that pace. So yeah, take the chance. Let's go, there's a bunch of questions that I've sort of neglected, but this is one, I don't know who can answer this, but somebody think about it. This is a person who is accustomed to going overseas as a missionary. It is tough to think about traveling overseas now. It is tough sometimes using Zoom to accomplish the same tasks in an overseas setting as it would be perhaps in the United States, when everyone's speaking the same language and has the same customs, and we all sit here on Zoom and we all sort of are accustomed to the way we are acting and rolling. That may not at all be the case overseas. So from an overseas perspective, what would we say are the unique challenges presented by COVID and the other changes that have happened? I just throw it out to anybody, because you all have ideas on this, I know.
I think, in some ways it's and there's a couple layers, I think, to the question they're trying to ask, but like in terms of dealing with overseas donors, some way it might have gotten easier because they used to expect you were going to go visit them, and now like legally their countries won't allow us to go visit them, right? So like, you know, in some ways, maybe it's a little bit easier because they're going to engage with you here. I think part of, you know, sort of unpacking that question a little bit though is talking about like, how will charities or nonprofits serving overseas be received by donors? And I think that is going to change because there's like this interesting dynamic where the need here at home, while still nothing compared to what it is in some of the developing world, suddenly seems a lot greater, right? So you could see a place where donors might start to say, hey, that was great, but I need to sort of take care of my neighbors who are now hungry, and I can't really help, you know, sort of bring literacy to you know, rural parts of Vietnam, right? Like you can sort of see where a donor might reprioritize that, but that's probably short term. I mean, I think people much more live in a global world. Like, you know, they see it as, you know, the rural part of Vietnam's problems are eventually going to be my problem, right? And maybe we've even seen that from COVID more than ever. Like the whole world has experienced this. So I don't know. My instinct is that won't change much. It'll be easier to connect because people won't expect you to travel. Short term, people may shy away from international missions, but long term, they'll come back to it. So that's a perfect consultant non-answer for you.
It's good BS answer there, Craig. I have to say, on the
Anytime.
so here's one that I'm not sure I am going to represent properly, but let's take a look at the rise of women philanthropists and our women and men of color and other sectors that have received the recognition in the past. Shabby, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what that person is saying is, you know what, there have been a lot of successes and a lot of outstanding people of color and women who have been in the field and done great work. And so let's make sure that we recognize all of those accomplishments. Am I getting that right?
I agree. That's how I'm reading it.
Okay,
And
great.
I say
Yeah.
kudos.
So
And-
kudos to all those folks.
I would just add, you know, I think there's multiple layers here of looking at our work as nonprofits and the industry through a racial, you know, equity lens. It's our talent and our talent pool and developing that pool, as Shabby can speak to. And it's also looking at our leadership, how we're recruiting our board members and looking at a more diverse pipeline, how we're looking at our donor pipelines and making intentional moves to identify donors of means and color. And, you know, I think there's a lot of organizations that have been doing that really well, and we need to learn from them because there's more organizations who haven't been thinking about that yet and are now starting to.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that we have a whole webinar series dedicated just to this topic, and we're going to be pulling in experts to talk about a couple different angles, right? I'll be pulling in people to discuss like DEI fundamentals in hiring, employee engagement, and the like, and we'll have folks, to Kelly's point, on the front lines to talk about their experiences in the philanthropic space, right? So like specifically working with donors, with boards, with colleagues, in what we know is a predominantly white environment. So, I mean, I think it'll be really fascinating. So stay tuned for that. But I would be remiss if we got through this whole thing and I didn't mention that,
So
because it is coming.
Complete the commercial. When will that webinar be taking place, Shabby?
Mine is going to be on September 23rd, and then I think we have some others lined up after that. But I'll be talking to.
You should, in the email that will follow this, you'll get the dates. But I think it's
A well-coordinated marketing effort.
23rd is one, and the other one's a surprise. Like we're not going to tell you. Check your email. This is a teaser to make sure you read your actual emails.
Exactly, and if you log in
Creating
now,
it as we speak.
exactly, and if you buy
really
now,
great.
we'll waive the shipping and handling fee. It'll be great.
And this just in. October 7th is the second one.
Ah, okay. A little bird. CJ, I'm thinking of you with this question. One phenomenon that we've all seen in the NGO space is the loosening of grant restrictions to allow organizations to pivot and reallocate resources for immediate needs. That has clearly been the case. You've been involved with some of that. What is your perspective on that?
Absolutely, it's loosening. I think also the racial inequity movement that's happening is forcing some foundations to realize that by restricting their grants, they're really saying that they don't really trust the leader, right? That's kind of what some research has come out to say. And so some foundations are looking and saying, oh my gosh, you know, I didn't even realize that was happening. So you're finding that a lot of these organizations are loosening the restrictions to do more unrestricted gifts and allow the leader to make the decision on how to use the money appropriately, because it's coming down to trust. And so you're seeing that barrier starting to break down a little bit. Cheryl Dorsey from Echoing Green, if you have a chance, just go Google her and her New York Times article, where she talks about barriers to capital. And one of the conclusions of the research was that leaders of color were 97% more chance of getting a restricted grant versus an unrestricted grant from their white colleague leaders. So it's something that people don't realize that they're doing when they're giving away the money, but I'm hoping that this whole movement has brought that to light, and why you're seeing now a lot more unrestricted gifts.
Anybody else, Craig and Kelly in particular, have you seen shifts in the ability to access funds on behalf of our clients and partners?
I've seen all the data that and all the sort of press that says, and I've heard CJ have some real good anecdotes around like foundations doing just that. I'll admit, I haven't seen them do it as much as they said they were doing it. Like, I mean, just to sort of put it on the table, like I think there's been a lot of, yes, our foundation is going to remove our restrictions. And then there's been a lot of program officers that say, yeah, no, but not for you, right? Like, so I do think it's not exactly sort of taken hold yet, but I think it will. And I think any other trend we've ever seen has started with a lot of talk, and then there's sort of a longer tail of action in our sector. Like, we're kind of slow, but it's coming.
Yeah, I could see like I've been talking to some organizations that have been issuing those bonds, and those have really been unrestricted, just whatever you need, go. So you're seeing some foundations take immediate action with those.
There's a question here, Shabby, you can see about, are there any opportunities, for pro bono training in D&I? I would think the answer to that would be a big yes, but do you know?
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there is. I don't actually know, but I can look it up, and we can see if we can share some resources after the fact or after this. But what I would say though is what I've seen a number of organizations do right at this moment is make the ask of their boards to help them find these resources or fund the resources themselves, or like fund the access to these resources. So I would definitely look to your boards if you can. I've seen a number of organizations already do that, and it has worked. They are willing to put their money where their mouths are if this is something that's really important to them, and we're seeing hand over fist that it is.
Yeah, there's a comment here, the wealth transfer to women of color over the next few years is going to be tremendous. So much potential for philanthropic impact among underrepresented donor communities. That would go to the point, I think, of making sure that we're paying attention and bringing all types of folks from all types of backgrounds, onto our boards, into our leadership positions, and not only gaining different perspectives, but, you will see, to the point here, a transfer of wealth that's going to hopefully be broader, even though our current experience is not really the case so yet, but I think it's probably true that over a period of time that will happen. Did anyone else did I miss anything in that question? Sometimes it's not really a question.
But I think you just sort of raised one thing that I just want to sort of call out. And again, we'll talk about this in these webinars that Shabby teas that are coming up, but right, like donors become board members hire the leadership sets the culture sets the, like, that's kind of where it starts. Like, if we can actually get beyond donors that frankly look like me, you're going to see a lot of things sort of downstream just get better, right? So I think that's.
Well, you just opened up a big door there. People that look like you, Craig. Don't have us go there.
Bald, bearded, strikingly handsome.
I think we know what you meant. Knew what you meant, but watch out.
With glasses.
All right.
This is one of my favorite topics. Wouldn't this be a good time to show the Deadwood board members to the door and let them know we love them, but especially in light of what's going on, whether it's high net worth or diversity. We need them to be donors. If not now, we need their slot. I am an enormous advocate of that. It's just best practices to keep moving our board membership, on a regular basis. But B, times are changing dramatically, as we're all talking about here. And whether it is attracting, the next high net worth person who can fund the next big program, or it's, being more diverse represented in the communities you serve and the communities you wish to serve, and the type of organization you wish to be, it is vitally important that boards reflect that. So Craig, I think that's part of what you were saying as well. Anybody want to reflect on that? I mean, it's a pretty obvious point, but you know, we're not all doing it. So
yeah, I think it can be, you know, nerve-wracking to think about doing it, right? Because you can be afraid to bring this up with board members who've given so much of their time and you know, wealth over the years. But I will say, a lot of the times they're happy you bring up the topic. They want you to have the conversation with them. That's not the case every time, and in other cases, you could create an emeritus board or advisory board or some other entity like that where you could sort of retire them off into that role where they still have access. They are still, you know, receive recognition. They're still involved, so you can ask for a gift still. So there's some different techniques you can use to make it feel natural and, you know, not an insult.
yeah, because this is my favorite topic, I'll say, you know, I've been the executive director of, I guess, 5 nonprofits in addition to being, you know, CEO here. And what I find the best practice is to go out with each board member at least once a year, one-on-one, and go through sort of a report card of, well, what did we expect to do this year together? What did we actually do? What didn't we do? And then set forth, you know, the goals and plans moving forward. You'd be amazed how many people at that moment opt out. They say, well, I hear you on what you're expecting of me and what the way the organization is moving. And I just can't, I can no longer participate at that level, or I don't want to, or, you know, I've just been here long enough. That is a great way to set up that type of conversation in a very honest way and in a way that I guarantee you they will react before you ask them. They will say, you know what, it's just time for me to move on. And to Kelly's point, if you have already created some form of advisory board or emeritus board or whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter, but where they're still honored for their time and their commitment, and you still have access to them, by the way, but they don't have to come to board meetings. They aren't expected to be a fiduciary member of your board, that type of thing. I think that is a very strong point. By the way, we'd love to help you on any of those points if you need help. So there was a question about, you know, who was the person that CJ referred to? It's Cheryl Dorsey. You can see it in the comments there with a copy of the article. There you go. I think that's our very competent behind the what do you call it?
Katie.
Yeah.
And the curtain, behind the curtain.
That's what I'm looking for.
There's
Oz reference.
There's one question in the Q&A function too around major gifts making the world go round. Very true. But do you think we will end up losing the buzz and excitement around a cause that comes from the masses of participants if we scale back on that front? So basically, I think it's asking, you know, do we go all in on major gifts and pull back on maybe more broad-based efforts? And I think you all might agree with me, my colleagues here, but the answer is no. I think there's importance to all of those strategies, and you need to build that broad-based pool of donors to help build your pipeline for major gifts. You know, a lot of people start by making those, you know, $100 gifts, and then you well screen them and find out who has potential to become a major donor. So there's a really important connection between all those donor levels and how they tie together. And it's important to, you know, invest in many of them.
Yeah, it's definitely an and, right? And I think in the last 6 months, the 2 trends that have really come through is big gifts have been strong and little gifts have been strong, right? So like if you were nurturing both ends of that, you've done well. If not, not so much. But I also have this theory that like the ability to go out and raise money from the masses is almost a little bit of a test of like how relevant is your mission and your impact on the community, right? Like if a lot of people won't give you money, start to think about, you know, what I'm doing, does it really matter to the community? So I think it's a super important thing to just do. But yeah, you have to do both.
Good point. All right, we're right at time. We have 1 minute left. Is there any other question that hasn't been taken? Ooh, someone said thank you, Steve. We'll take that all day long. Wasn't you, CJ? Why not?
Yes, thank you, Steve.
This has been a lot of fun for us. I hope it has been for you. We'll be back, I guess, next week with Shabby. I feel like a television announcer at this point. These are fun to do because these are very challenging, but really interesting times. We just have to feed into it. We have to use our very best skills and everything we've learned in our respective backgrounds, to cope with what's going on right now in a productive and positive way. So I think we all try to do that. Some of us do it better than others, or some of you do it better than others of us. But we try to partner with those of you who are doing it. So thank you for attending. We'll see you next time. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.